Hi, this is William, and welcome to another look. John Carpenter's stature as one of the defining genre filmmakers of the 20th century is undeniable. His run of, and get ready for this, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness, and They Live is possibly my favorite stretch of filmography from any director. One classic after another, all so different in their approach. And his influence stretches far beyond the 80s indie homages or Stranger Things, so much so that Tarantino's Hateful Eight was essentially an extended riff of The Thing, only functioning as a mystery western rather than a sci-fi horror. Or even 2020's Bacurau, an electrifying Brazilian film about the nature of community that ultimately turns into a siege picture with vengeance on its mind. And that's ignoring his influences on Metal Gear Solid and other forms of interactive media such as the Dead Space series. But it's not just the narrative drive that John Carpenter has influenced. In fact, it's well known that a lot of his own influence is derived from Howard Hawks, a director who found poetry and warmth in professional environments and various masculine archetypes. Films like Rio Bravo and The Thing from Another World, which Hawks was a producer on, linger in their DNA across John Carpenter's work. But there's a more formal elegance at play with his films, and it's one of the key characteristics that I love about his movies, and it's how he presents the horror of the picture. The key phrase here is absence. If John Carpenter's films conclude with an explosive catharsis of action, terror, and emotion, they're successful primarily because of how he builds the tension to that moment, not just merely through characterization or an escalating sense of dread, or even his deliberate pacing, although that all contributes. What I find most valuable in his films is how he implies the presence of what we fear. The monster or evil featured in the film, whether it be The Thing or Michael Myers or the aliens in They Live, are often hidden from us, and the scare factor is found in what is insinuated. John Carpenter working in a commercial mode will always end up giving the audience what they want, but the artfulness in that build-up is central to the success of his films. Take, for instance, the original Halloween. Released in 1978 and made on a budget of around $300,000, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill went out of their way to enhance the initial concept, a movie where an escaped killer stalks babysitters. John Carpenter, speaking with Rolling Stone while on the set of The Fog back in 1979, said this: "Halloween night. It has never been the theme in a film. My idea was to do an old haunted house movie. When we used to go to state fairs, they always had an attraction called the haunted house. It would be completely dark, and as you stepped on certain boards, things would jump out and scare you, sort of like the spook ride at an amusement park. That's what I wanted to do, a spook ride on film, taking the audience through twists and turns and having things jump out at them." All of this in theory sounds great. But what John Carpenter does is in the tradition of Alfred Hitchcock just as much as it is a defining slasher structure. The audience is aware of Michael Myers from the beginning. We see his origin, killing his older sister with a knife on Halloween, and we have Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis to provide the up-to-date details of Myers' evil nature once he's escaped. But for us to be truly scared of him is all up to Carpenter's framing. Above all, Halloween is scary because of one concept. And luckily for John Carpenter, it's one that has proven to work time and time again. Where is the monster? John Carpenter sets up the narrative. We are introduced to the trio of characters, so brilliantly written by Deborah Hill, and then we are introduced to the space. When the girls drive to the neighborhood where they're babysitting, the two houses are across the street from one another. The simplicity of the location allows John Carpenter to place Michael Myers anywhere he wants to for his own purpose. And in calling him The Shape, it isn't just an ethereal name, but a recognition of how this villain will function within the narrative. Michael Myers is simply a shape to look for within the frame, whereas the monster soon becomes the active motivation of the viewer, constantly scanning the widescreen compositions for a glimpse of Michael Myers. And John Carpenter plays with the reality that the audience is more in the know than the characters themselves. A key sequence to Halloween's effectiveness is the scene where Jamie Lee Curtis's character Laurie wanders over across the street In the dead of night, autumn leaves twirling in the air, the cold wind practically felt off the screen to check on her friends Annie and Linda. We're aware that Annie, Linda, and her boyfriend Paul have been murdered by Michael Myers, but Laurie isn't aware of that. And all John Carpenter needs to do is show a deliberate scene of Laurie walking across the street, cutting back and forth from shots of her walking to a shot of the house where their bodies lay inside, and the audience is instantly on edge. We don't know what will happen to Laurie, but we are unable to help her as spectators, and that's what's terrifying. This is what John Carpenter's sense of absence is all about. What is implied is almost as horrifying as the infamous closet scene, or the moment where Laurie is sprinting across that very same street, with the shape right behind her on the chase. And the final moments of the film are a clear representation of John Carpenter's style, showcasing all the spaces that the shape has wandered, with his intense breathing steadily growing louder over the soundtrack. These houses, and the town of Haddonfield, seem to be forever marked by Michael Myers' presence. He could be anywhere. But John Carpenter continued to develop this suspense throughout his career, and he would find increasingly complex concepts in order to further enhance the effectiveness of his scares. Even in films like Escape from New York, which really isn't a horror movie but has horror imagery, is defined by widescreen compositions of desolate city streets, and every person that wanders into the frame is someone to notice. So, in thinking about this absence in the frame, we turn to John Carpenter's follow-up to Halloween, The Fog. Ultimately costing over $1 million due to reshoots, with additional violence and gore added to compete with other slashers at the time, The Fog is still nonetheless a quiet, sleepy ghost story, almost too sleepy for some viewers. Set in the coastal and fictional town of Antonio Bay and shot in Northern California, John Carpenter moves his eye from the ordinary suburbia of Halloween's Haddonfield to the slumber of a town by the sea. The film even begins with an old fisherman retelling the tale of the Fog's central narrative. A ship by the name of Elizabeth Dane is sunk by the town founders, so to stop the lepers on board from establishing a colony on land. It's a campfire tale by nature, and soon, nearing the 100th anniversary of the town, the fog rolls into the bay, and inside it, the vengeful spirits of the Elizabeth Dane crew. John Carpenter, working with master DP Dean Cudney once again, offers expansive widescreen compositions of empty space, and when the fog enters the frame, the audience is aware of the ghost lingering within. But this creates another layer of suspense for John Carpenter to operate in. With many scenes of the fog, it isn't the fog itself that is scary, but what it signifies, the arrival of Elizabeth Dane's crew. The visual of the fog is simply an escalation of the tension, and the homely spaces of Antonio Bay, as the fog slips under the doors and enters through windows, are intruded by this haunted force. As we first see the fog approaching, it becomes a wall that encloses around the characters, and it immediately renders the outside world, smothered with fog, as a dangerous one. John Carpenter plays off of his love of siege movies once again, with the climax of the film set in a church as the hands of the ghost crew break past the stained glass, with an otherworldly white glow radiating from the fog beyond. In the fog, it's the absence of the spirits, seen in tattered clothes, red eyes, and sharp pirate swords and hooks, that only adds to the suspense of the major scenes. The fog itself lets us know the ghosts are coming, but it gives John Carpenter the opportunity to once again play with expectations. As the compositions fill with the sight of fog, the spectator is on the lookout for any presence to reach out of it and drag the victims back into the void, never to be seen again. The tagline, "There's something in the fog," couldn't be more apt. You could even argue that it's a reinterpretation of Halloween, with both Michael Myers and the ghostly crew of the fog operating as manifestations of the dark secrets of the past. Or even on a more existential note, that the fog is a visual representation of death, and the great beyond being nothing but a void that consumes everything in its wake. Ultimately, John Carpenter's horror films, as we've examined in this essay, are scarier when nothing's really happening, because we know what lies ahead. The horror of absence is simply a byproduct of a harsh reality with his characters, that they acknowledge how vulnerable they are to the dangers around them. Their fear is based in the unknown.
What's your problem? I said, what's your problem?